starting templates for this project, and with the new version of Cinema 4D, we have to, let me update one of the tutorials here about setting this up. So what you'll see when you download the template and open it up is something like this. You should see this exactly, actually. And let's break down what we've got here. I'm gonna get rid of this other window for right now. And the text object here, labeled motext, it used to be motext, now it's just called text. This is an object that makes three-dimensional text, and you're able to update it. And so, for instance, for the impact scene, you can come in here and update the text spline to impact. You can see it kind of doesn't fit anymore, and so you want to resize it using the height here. Okay, you do not want to unequally scale it. Same rules apply for 3D text as 2D text, and we never want to, hit T and then scale this unequally, because the text will distort, and we can't distort fonts like that. The studio has all the things that are sort of laid out already for the studio, and there's a sky object that's sort of giving us some reflections. There's the bar, and then these hammers that are laid out. There's a light and a light target. The camera is already set up. The camera's got, you see that I am looking through the camera. And what's the name for this tag right here? Anybody remember? Yeah, that's a protection tag. And so I would leave that on the camera so that you can't move the camera by accident. If you need to do some work, step out of the camera, and then we can move around and do what we need to do. There's two balls here and two hammers. When you're animating the hammer, I've already got this set up so that it's easy to select, but you don't want to select here because the hammer is actually a multi-part thing. There's like a torus and another part and a hammer part. And if I just click on this part, you see if I go to rotate this, it's actually just this part of the hammer, and that's not what I want. I want to select the hammer up here because that's the whole object, and now if I rotate it, it rotates around that axis. Does that make sense for everybody? Right? And so select things over here on the right. Let's talk about bringing in some materials. And so now we can use the content browser, asset browser rather. So I open this up, and let's do some sort of wood on the floor. And so just gonna get out of that there. Remember, this is all searchable. And so let's just narrow this down to materials, wood, and let's get this parquet. And I'm just gonna drag this over to my plane, which is the floor here. Dump that on. Let's see. When you have multiple materials on something, the one on the right, they evaluate from right to left, right, in this direction. So this is the top to the right. In general, right now, we just want one material on an object, and so you can delete that one. If it's not looking that great when you bring it in, you can select it, double click, and go to viewport and up the resolution, right? I'm going to say 4096. And the preview that you see in the viewport will be much nicer, right? You get way more detail, right? So you double click the material tag, go to viewport, and increase the texture preview size. Does that make sense? And so for this, it's like a wood floor. That looks good, but the wood panels are huge, right? And so I'm going to select this. I'm going to click on it once, and that gives me the tiling options. And so if I go, let's say maybe I want it to be more tiles, and so I'll say like 20 by 20. There we go, right? That's a much sort of more appropriate looking parquet floor size, right? And you see how it really helps the whole scene in that now the scale of the objects and the type makes a lot more sense. Okay, so the important thing to realize with the materials is there's the material itself. If you double click, you get this window, and these are all the material options. And then there's the material tag, right? Because if I put the parquet floor on two different objects, right, they each could have their own amount of tiling, right? And so you get a different menu here when you select the tag versus when you either double click the tag or click the material. This is the material options. This would apply to everything that the material is applied to. If you select the tag, these are the options for how the material is projected onto that piece of geometry. Right? And so you can have individual decisions about that. Let's go ahead and get some metal for this stuff here. Let's try this. I'm going to use the, yeah, like this. I'll go ahead and drag that onto this bar. And give it a second to update. There it is. With the viewport render, sometimes it takes a second. It's talking to your GPU and has to upload the stuff. There we go. And so then also, I want this hammer to be the same metal texture. I'm going to take the material and drag it onto the top of the hammer hierarchy. Everybody see this here? So here, you could texture these things individually, but if you put the material at the top of the hierarchy, it'll apply to everything below it, right? So if I want to make the whole hammer gold, I'll drag it up here, and now you see it propagates down through this. If I wanted something to have its own, one part of the hammer to have its own look, I could put this on, this part, right? Let me use the other hammer, the ones in the front. I could put it on this part here. There we go. And then put something else on the other parts. But in this case, I just want it to be the whole hammer, and so I'll just put it at the top. And so I'll do that for the top one. And remember, you can control drag the tags here too. So I'll just control drag this down to the other hammer. And there we go. Now all of that is gold, right? Cool. Let's come up with a material for the ball. And so we're going to use a pattern for that and make one of our own materials. And so I'm just going to double click down here to make a new blank material, and I'll call this pattern. There we go. And double click on that, and now we have a few things. Let's go ahead and go to the color and then go to the texture, and down here there's a bunch of different things we could load in an image, or we could go to, where is it? We want, surfaces, tiles, right? And that creates this parametric tile pattern. I'm going to go ahead and drag this onto this ball, right? We want a tile pattern on here because these balls are going to roll, right? And so you want to be able to tell that they're rolling. If you just made them like really shiny or something like that, you wouldn't really be able to see them rolling quite as much. So let's drag that on there and let it update for a second. And let's see, why is it not looking that? Let's put it on the other one. Let's try one other thing. Might need a slightly different material. Let's try this. Okay, so let's make a slightly different material here. So if you just double click, this is, I don't want to get too far into the weeds here, but if you make a new material, you can see that there's some different options here, right? And so if you just double click like I did, it made a new standard material, but we actually want a PBR material here. PBR, physically based rendering. I'd write that one down, right? Physically based rendering is kind of the system that makes this render quickly and kind of look like the real world. And so let's drag that on there. And then double click on our PBR. And you'll see that reflectance is selected, and then I'll select diffuse, right? Diffuse, I'd write that down in my book, is just sort of the general color of something. And so with this diffuse, I can go to texture and let's load that tile. So surfaces, tiles, there we go. Great. All right, so that's interacting correctly now. And once that's there, now I can, if I click here, this sort of takes me to the options for the tiles. And here, this is a parametric thing. And so I can choose different patterns here. It's kind of fuzzy. And so I'm going to come over here to viewport and make sure I turn this up to 2048. There we go. That makes that look much cleaner. I can come in here and edit the colors for this, for the tile pattern. So I can make it my own. The grout width here and bevel, I could make that smaller. Just sort of tighten up these lines. See how that looks a lot cleaner there now? And I can pick, a fun pattern that's going to be obvious when it's rolling around. Does that make sense, right? And so the key here is make sure you make a new PBR material. And in the reflectance, select diffuse, and then load under the surfaces tiles. And in here, you can have some fun with how you set this up. It doesn't have to look exactly like mine. You can do your own thing. You just want to be able to tell that it's actually rolling, right? And you can change the sort of global scale here. If I make it smaller, you see that I get more tiling, right? And so let's say 20. There we go. That looks pretty nice. And I'll call this pattern 1. And I want to use, I don't want to have to set all that up again. So I'll just control drag this over. And now I can drag this onto my other ball. There we go. And come in here and just change the stuff on my pattern. And so let's make this one a slightly different color, kind of like this. And maybe this is kind of like a yellow or something. There we go. That's interesting. And then pick a different sort of pattern for this ball. What does squares look like? There, like that. And let's make the global scale a little bit bigger. Right, so again, you don't have to use the same values I did here. You can find your own pattern. What does spiral look like? There we go. I like those two together. Right. And so now I've got this set up, and maybe find another metal to use for, or maybe a plastic for the type here. And yeah, metal is going to work well here. Maybe a little bit like this bronze. I'll drag that onto the no text. And give that a second. There we go. That doesn't give me a lot of contrast. I want it to stick out some more. Let's say the brushed aluminum. That's better. It doesn't sort of come into the floor quite as much. And let's go back and look through our camera. There we go. Makes sense? Right? And so this is, way pretty simple. We're able to, you guys are getting more familiar with the asset browser here. And so that makes it pretty easy to sort of customize the look of this, right? And then, the other tutorials are up about animating this whole scene. But the key here is that when you make a new material, you make a PBR material, not a standard material. But all of these asset browser materials should be, they're all PBR by default. And so you can, when you drag them in there, they should look pretty good just out of the box. You need to, in case something doesn't, just try a different material. But for in general, they should be pretty good. Make sense? Any questions about setting that up? Okay, great. I'll put that up there as a